Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm a virtual avatar in Developers Shore. I hope you're all doing well and ready to learn. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to invite you to become a member of the Great Devs. As a member of the Developers Shore community, you'll have access to our job opportunities, activities, and future webinars. You can join us by responding to our invitation email or completing the form on our website. Also, a recording of this webinar will be on our LinkedIn page. Without further ado, let's dive into today's topic. Please give a warm welcome to our speaker.
Hi everyone, super happy to be here with you. So who here is excited about generative AI and the evolution we've really seen in the past year and a half? Well, if I could see your hands raised, I'm sure the majority of you are. I'm super excited for generative AI. So my name is Gunnar Grosch. I am a developer advocate working for AWS. I'm based in Sweden and covering in Northern Europe mainly. So in this session, we're going to look at generative AI and how you can make use of generative AI when building applications. But we're also going to look at how you as a developer can benefit from using tools that are leveraging generative AI. So let's jump straight into it. So generative AI, as we know, it's taken the world by storm because we've been able to these consumer-facing applications like ChatGPT, we've been able to experience how powerful these latest machine learning models have become. So while a lot of the attention has been given to how consumers are using generative AI, we think that there is an even bigger opportunity for how businesses will use it to deliver amazing experiences for their customers and for their employees. So the true power of generative AI, it goes beyond just a search engine or a chatbot. And we are now just seeing the start of what generative AI can be. So the potential of generative AI is incredibly exciting. There are all of these forecasts. Goldman Sachs has a forecast that $7 trillion increase in global GDP, and it will lift productivity growth by 1.5 percentage points over the next coming 10 years. So the field of artificial intelligence, it has been around for decades. So some of you might have this question. So with all of the potential, why is this technology that has been around for so long, why is it reaching its tipping point right now? Well, it's really because of the massive proliferation of data, the availability of highly scalable cloud capacity, and all of the advancements we've seen in machine learning technologies over time. So now is really the time where generative AI is finally taking shape and finally is able to take shape. So what is generative AI then? Well, it's an AI technology that can produce new original content that's close enough to human-generated content for real-world tasks, such as answering questions, summarizing text, or generating images. And the models powering generative AI, they are now known as foundation models. And they are trained of massive amounts of data with billions of parameters, closing up on trillions of parameters. And developers such as yourself and such as me, we can adapt these foundation models for a wide range of use cases with very little fine-tuning needed. So using these models can reduce the time for developing new AI applications to a level that wasn't really possible before. So where does it fit in the world of artificial intelligence? So when we're starting the generative AI journey for the first time, it can seem a bit confusing. So first we have the broadest area, artificial intelligence. And that's any technique that allows computers to mimic human intelligence. And this could be through logic, if-then statements, or machine learning. And within that scope, machine learning is a subset where machines are used to search for patterns in data to build logic models automatically. And machine learning models, they developed from these shallow models to deeply multi-layered neural networks. That's called deep learning models. So deep learning models, they are more complicated tasks like speech and image recognition. And then we have generative AI, which is a subset of deep learning. It's powered by the foundation models that I mentioned that are extremely large, and they can then do the most complex of tasks. So if we then dive a little deeper to understand the complexity of generative AI, traditional forms of machine learning, they allowed us to take very simple inputs like numeric values and then map them to simple outputs like predicting values. But then with the advent of deep learning, we could take more complicated inputs like a video or an image and then map them to still relatively simple outputs, identify an object in an image, for instance. And now then with generative AI, we can leverage these massive amounts of complex data to capture and present knowledge in a more advanced way, mapping complicated inputs to complicated outputs, like extracting a summary and key insights from a large document of text, for instance. So if we look at it from a model point of view, the traditional machine learning models, they are trained using supervised processes. So these models, they use architectures that require data labeling and model training to produce a model for one specific task. The foundation models that power generative AI applications, they are driven by a transformer neural network architecture. And these architectures, they enable models to be pre-trained of massive amounts of unlabeled data. That is self-supervised learning process. So they can be used for a wide variety of generalized tasks. And they can easily be adapted for specific domains or industries with the help of customization process known as fine-tuning, where we use a small amount of labeled data that we then input into these models. And this differences between traditional machine learning models and foundation models is what can save everyone tons of resources in terms of time and effort to get started using it. And there are mainly 3 types of models. First type is text-to-text models. They accept text as an input, and they have text as an output as well. For example, you can give a newspaper article as an input to a foundation model, and then you get a text summary back as a response. The second type of foundation model is text-to-embedding models. These models, they accept text as an input, and they output a numerical representation of the input text. And these numerical representations, they are called embeddings. And then the third category is a multi-model foundation models. These models, they take text as an input, but they can generate output in other data modalities, such as images. So we have these 3 different ways of doing it. And this is the basics of generative AI. And the use cases we see today, well, they are usually grouped in these 3 categories. One is focused on the customers. By using generative AI, we can reinvent the way that customers interact with your company and enhance the experience for those customers. The other one is usually focused on employees, by using generative AI to boost productivity and creativity. And then the third one is usually focused around backend processes. So by using generative AI, we can optimize and augment the resulting then in higher efficiencies and lower costs. And we think of generative AI as these 3 macro layers. All 3 are super important when it comes to generative AI. And the bottom layer, it is the infrastructure, the ones that's used to train these foundation models or the FMs and run these models in production. The middle layer provides access to the large language models and other foundation models. And then the top layer is applications that are built using foundation models. So let's just jump into it. So looking at the bottom ones, we are talking about 2 main workloads. One is training and one is inference. Training is when you create and improve your foundation models by learning patterns from large amounts of training data. Then inference is when you use those models to generate an output, such as text, images, or videos. And to do this, well, you need massive amounts of compute power. So to make it economical and feasible, you need to run these on different types of hardware that is performant, cost-effective, and so on, and built to be able to use for AI. And at AWS, well, we have different services that are accessible to be able to do that, to both train your models and then to run inference against your models. We're not going to focus on this part in this presentation more. Then a lot of customers, they have questions because they want to get started and just use generative AI. So they aren't at that bottom layer of the stack. They started quickly. They want to experiment with different foundation models and test different types of use cases to be able to meet and try this opportunity that we have with generative AI. So their questions might be, which model should I use? How do I decide which ones are best for my application? How can we quickly start building and using generative AI? And then how can I use my data in this in a secure way? So that's the middle layer of this. Many people just want to get access to generative AI and start using it when they're building. So at AWS, we have a service called Amazon Bedrock, which is our way for any developer, any company to start using generative AI as a building block for their applications. So customers are already using Bedrock as a way to then start using these large language models and foundation models within their applications. So it works this way. First, you pick which foundation model you want to use. You have a bunch of different models to pick from. Next, you can customize the experience using your own data through technique like I mentioned before with fine-tuning or retrieval augmented generation or RAG. Then you can start orchestrating tasks using tools that are offered by Bedrock to be able to solve different problems with it. And then the pointer is to remember that the content that you're putting into Bedrock, it isn't used by AWS or Amazon to improve the data. That is your data and your data alone. And like I said, you have a choice of different models. So you're not stuck to using one specific model. Instead, you can choose from several different foundation models that are available for you. Different suppliers, such as Anthropic with their cloud model, for instance, or you can use Mistral AI and their different models. And then when you've chosen your model, you can start building using that. So let's look at an example of this. So this is the AWS console, and this is Amazon Bedrock within the console. And I'm just going to show you how this works by using what's called a playground within Bedrock. That is where you're able to test out models and try different things. So let's kick it off. So now we are in Amazon Bedrock and in the image playground. And we've chosen to use the Titan image generator as a model in this case. So we can start writing prompts that you've probably tried yourself with different generative AI applications. So we want a house in the mountains. So now the model is going to generate images for us. Let's pick one of the images. And now next, we can then using this, or we can edit. Let's edit it. So we're selecting the house. And now instead, we want a tree in that place. So now the model is going to regenerate and edit the image and put a tree in place instead of that house. So let's change. We want the tree to have red leaves. Running again. And it is then updating that image. Let's switch back, try another example. Blue backpack on a table as a prompt. Rerunning it. So Titan can now generate this image for us. And we get 3 examples. Let's pick the first one. And once again, we can edit this image that is generated. And let's make a quick change to it. We want the flowers to be red instead. And rerun. And it's editing the image and making changes to it. So now we have red flowers instead. And now when we do this, we can also check, because all of this is happening with the help of APIs. So we can look at what is the exact API request that is being done to make this happen. So we can use that API call ourselves. So using the playground is a good way of getting started, testing and trying how it works to use these foundation models or large language models. So that's the first example of using Bedrock. And this API call could then be something that you're instead using within your application as a way to generate images or generate text if you're using a different foundation model. So when it comes to driving business, then, well, I think to be able to really do that, you need to use more than just that foundation model. You need something within the generative AI that understands your business, no matter if it's in e-commerce or if you're in hospitality or if you're in manufacturing. It needs to understand your business. It needs to understand your customers, your products, and your operations. And that's only possible really when you start using your own data, not only those billions or up to trillions of parameters that are in the models, but the additional data that you put into it. So with Bedrock, you can then use different type of capabilities to customize these applications with your own data. So you can just, within a few clicks, go from creating a generic application to something that is more specific and tailored for your specific business and for your specific use case. So one important technique, it is the fine-tuning that I mentioned before. It is when you point the models to examples of data that you store, where you have labeled it to provide context. This might be pointing your data or your models to proposals that you've created, that you have labeled as strong or great proposals. In that way, the model can learn from that data and the data that really matters to you. Then Bedrock will make a copy of that base model, it trains it again, and it creates a private fine-tuned model, so you get your tailored responses. And fine-tuning, it is available with some of these models today, and it will be available for more models coming soon as well. The second technique for tailoring your foundation models is retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. It allows you to customize the model response when you want the model to consider new knowledge or up-to-date info. So you can do this by calling and bringing back your own data from multiple sources. That could be from document repositories, from databases, from APIs. So you might want to use RAG to retrieve search results from, say, something that you're running in a search service or documents that you're storing in an object store. So with the foundation models, you have all of this data, the data that you fine-tuned, or perhaps you're using RAG as well. But the foundation models alone, they can't execute tasks. You can't have a model that actually books a flight for you or that processes an insurance claim. Because out of the box, the foundation models aren't able to access up-to-date knowledge sources because it's trained data. And they're also unable to take specific actions to fulfill these user requests, perhaps. So to make this happen, you as a developer, you need to follow a few different steps to make that happen. You might have to define instructions and orchestration, configure the foundation model to access company data sources, and perhaps write custom code to execute these steps through a series of API calls. And then you have to set up your policies for security and so on, and make this happen. So to make it as easy as possible, within Amazon Bedrock, we have something called agents for Bedrock, where you, with a few clicks, can create and configure your foundation model to automatically break down and orchestrate different tasks. So the agent will then connect to your company data sources through an API, and you can then automatically convert your data into a machine-readable format, and it can then be augmented, and the user request will use relevant information to generate a more accurate response. So it will take actions to fulfill the request from the user by executing API calls on your behalf. So let me show you an example of that. In this case, we have some Python code in place to help us upload data to get data that we're storing in S3. And this is our object store in Amazon S3, where we have a bunch of HTML documents that contains, in this case, product information, more information about different AWS services. So then if we switch back to Amazon Bedrock, we can then use what's called a knowledge base. And the knowledge base is where we are pointing to a specific data source. The data source in this case is our S3 bucket containing those documents. So it will always have up-to-date information from S3. And then we have an agent that we've created. And this agent is now ready to be able to answer questions with the help of our knowledge base. So it has access to that knowledge base besides the foundation model that it already has. So let's just prepare it. And now we can start testing this. So if we're asking how to build a VPC, a virtual private cloud, it will then answer that with the help of our knowledge base. So it is making a call to our knowledge base, asking for that. It will then give us information back with context based on that question that we asked, where it got it from, in this case, VPC document that contains information about VPCs. And it will then give us a response back based on that question, using the foundation model, but also primarily using the knowledge base that we find that contains up-to-date information for our use case. So let's see. Here we go. Now, that's the middle layer of the stack. So Amazon Bedrock gives us information, or it gives us the opportunity to start building our generative AI applications and then make use of these foundation models, these large language models in an easy way. And all is driven by APIs, and you can use the APIs and the SDKs to be able to then use Bedrock within your application. That then brings us to the top of the stack, which is where we'll look at how we're using, or how we are using generative AI within applications that are powered by generative AI. So I think the way we look at it is that generative AI has the potential to transform pretty much every customer experience. And this could be more or less everywhere that we have data, we can start using that data to optimal use. So it can generate insights to save hours of manual work for any type of business. And if we look at it from a developer's perspective, that I, as a developer, I can make use of generative AI and tools built with generative AI to be more efficient at what I'm doing. So if we look at the basis of being a developer, well, it is quite challenging to build reliable and secure applications, and for many, many reasons. One is that, well, there's a shortage of developers worldwide. Developers doesn't really have enough. We don't have enough developers, and we also don't have enough time as developers to focus on the important things, solving those business problems. And the time that we are spent on writing codes, we also face different types of hurdles. It could be that we have to learn new things. We have to understand technologies, try to understand APIs, and find best practices for the different technology that we're using. We have to try and find fixes for security issues. We have to detect security issues as well. And oftentimes when we build something, well, we own it as well. So we have to spend time on maintenance and upgrades and making sure that it keeps working over time. And also many times as a developer, I can just look at myself. When we write code, well, many times we don't start off with a blank sheet and just start writing code. Instead, we reuse code. We reuse open source code or things that we've written in the past. And how do we actually know that we are using it with the correct license, that we have the right to use that code that we're reusing? And then once we get our applications up and running, well, there's still a lot of undifferentiated heavy lifting. There's this recent study from Gartner. It shows that 73% of time is spent on running and maintaining applications, and only 27% of time on innovation and transformation. And we really want to flip that equation and give time back for creativity and innovation. So when we encounter an error in an application, there's a lot of work involved in fixing it. You have to analyze, digest metrics to understand the issue, and then you need to figure out the solution, write the configuration changes, deploy the fix into production, and that can start eating up hours or days of precious time. And all of this goes across the software development lifecycle, from architecting to developing to testing, deploying, and maintaining applications. The generative AI developer tools, they can help you save time, and they can automate a lot of this undifferentiated heavy lifting. So create space for innovation and creativity. And there's another interesting study that was done by software.com. They analyzed data from more than 250,000 developers worldwide over a 3-month period. And they found that the median time that developers spend writing or editing code in their IDE is less than 1 hour per day. And per work week, we spend less than 4.5 hours writing code. So only 10% of developers spend more than 2 hours per day coding. So why aren't we as developers able to spend more time doing the thing we love, writing code, building? And what are the challenges that we actually face here? Well, so we looked at that and we developed a tool that's called Amazon Code Whisperer. And Amazon Code Whisperer is a generative AI powered productivity tool to help with this, allow developers to focus on the things that matter, writing code that matters for their business, for their customers. It also helps you with a lot of this undifferentiated heavy lifting that I mentioned. For instance, security issues, knowing if the code is appropriate for use, and so on. And Code Whisperer then, it can generate a lot of code for developers, and it can then also accelerate the way you develop applications by freeing up developers to focus more on the business critical problems, the ones that they weren't able to get to before. So we want to make sure that developers are focusing on the right things. We at Amazon, we ran a productivity challenge internally, and participants who used Code Whisperer, they were 27% more likely to complete different tasks successfully, and they did so on average of 57% faster than those who didn't use Code Whisperer. And Code Whisperer, it is trained on billions of lines of code that's written at Amazon and AWS, but also different types of open source code. And it is an AI coding companion that's there to help you quickly write secure code. And it is available to use within your tools. So you can use it as an extension within VS Code, IntelliJ, and other JetBrains IDEs. And it's natively available in several of the AWS services in their consoles as well. And you can use it with full function support for Python, Java, JavaScript, TypeScript, C#, SageMaker, Jupyter, Kotlin, Rust, Go, PHP, and SQL. And the new one that we recently added is support for CloudFormation, which is infrastructure as code. So it can help you generate that type of code as well. And what makes Code Whisperer special, in my opinion, is that it's good for general use, no matter what type of language you're using out of these, but it's also specifically good since it's trained on our code. It's specifically good at how to use AWS and AWS services with the different SDKs, APIs, and so on. So, well, I mentioned some of the benefits already, but it's there to help you basically be quicker with doing your different types of tasks, and it will help you get better suggestions for how to use different APIs, SDKs, and different services. One key part of it is also security. I'll show you an example of that in a bit. So how does it work? Well, it uses natural language. So you add a comment within your IDE. So in this case, parse a CSV string of songs and return the list. You then add some additional data to make it accurate, and it will give you a suggestion based on this. If you don't like the first suggestion, well, you can skip through to a second one or a third one. You can update your comment to make it more accurate. So the higher accuracy you have within your natural language prompt, well, the better example you will get out as well. And it will match the developer coding style that is included. That could be, for instance, the variable naming convention and so on. It can also help you to automatically generate unit tests to reduce a lot of the overhead that I know a lot of developers are struggling with. An important part, like I mentioned, is knowing where code comes from. And this is where Coder, in my opinion, is really good, because it is, like I said, trained on a lot of different Amazon, but also open source code. So when it suggests code that might be similar to certain open source training data, it will mark it. Not only to show you where it comes from, it will mark it with the specific repository and the licensing information. So you can then track accepted suggestions that were similar to the training data. So you can also provide appropriate attribution if you in your software need to provide that attribution to the source. So this gives you the opportunity of knowing exactly where this code comes from. I mentioned security several times, and I think security is super important. At AWS, talk about that being the most important thing we do, making sure that things are secure. And what it has is an inbuilt function for security scanning. So you can scan the code that is developer written to detect different types of vulnerabilities. And you will then get remediation suggestions in return. And it will then scan for these different security vulnerabilities within your code, within your IDE. So let me show you an example of doing just that. So here we have a piece of Python code, and we're using Code Whisperer to initiate a security scan. It is running the scan on the file and its dependencies, and it will then eventually give us a finding back. In this case, it gives us a finding that it's using insecure hashing. So open that up and read what it actually means. It gives us information about it, but also a suggested code fix as a preview in this case. We should change it to using SHA-256, and we can then automatically apply it fix. So it updates the code for us. So by doing that and saving, we can now rescan, and it will do a rescan of it and give us information back. And in this case, it solved that issue, and we can move on to the next one. So having that built-in security scan is a great feature for developers. A new tool that we added is what's called Code Whisperer for command line. I know a lot of developers out there. I'm one of you. We love using the CLI, our command line. And I, for one, am pretty bad at remembering commands. So in the past, I used to Google a lot. Whenever there were things I got stuck on, I used Google, I found an answer, a bit of copy paste, helped me be able to use the CLI properly. I know I should know by now, but I'm guessing my memory is just full of different commands. So the Code Whisperer for command line, it helps you in a few different ways. It has autocomplete, which is a great feature, meaning that you can start typing and it will give you suggestions of how to finalize the commands or selecting the right options for your command. But you also have the way of using natural language within your CLI to get command output. So let me show you. So first off, the autocomplete function. So we can start writing. It will give me, in this case, show me the right folders. I can start writing git and add, and it will give me suggestions based on what I'm writing. Let's do the commit message and add that this is a feature, git push, origin, and to my feature branch. So autocomplete helps me do these tasks that I frequently do by it actually knowing what these commands are. And this is, once again, it's using foundation models that is trained on what these different commands might be. The second part is the natural language. So instead of writing the commands, well, I can write this, copy all files in this directory to S3, and it gets me the command in return. That disappeared very quick, but it gives me the command in return, and I can then choose to execute the command, edit it, regenerate, and so on. So if I know what I want to do, I can just use natural language straight in my CLI. Code Whisperer, of course, it also has enterprise controls. I know for a lot of companies, larger companies with a lot of developers, it's important to know exactly how these types of tools are used. The free version of Code Whisperer, it allows anyone to start using it. You simply have to install the toolkit in your IDE and you can get started. But if you're an enterprise, you can start setting up managing access. You can use single sign-on. You can set up different organizational policies. Then for those types of organizations as well, just like I showed with fine-tuning your foundation models, well, you might want to do fine-tuning or customization of your code suggestions, because you have perhaps over many, many years built up different ways of how you write code, your internal libraries, the different APIs you're using, so you can start training it on your own data. So make use of the data you have and point Code Whisperer to it so it can be trained on that data. What it does is, once again, it is then gonna generate base code recommendations based on the natural language comments that you write, but it will then use internalized and APIs that it knows about simply by you pointing it to those, so it can learn from it. And this very important is that this is only used for you, your organization in that case. That data is not used to train the main models. It is not used by anyone else. It is privately only for you and your company. I mentioned ChatGPT before, and that really laid the foundation for all of generative AI. And a lot of companies are using those type of chat applications to do tasks today. And there are some challenges, though, to using these AI chat applications at work, because they are super useful for consumers, but they don't really work at work, because the general knowledge, the capabilities are great, but they don't know your company, they don't know your data, your customers, your operations. So it limits how relevant these suggestions can be. Our flavor of chat assistant is Amazon Q. That's a generative AI powered assistant that is tailored for your specific business. So it lets you get answers quickly with natural language. Again, you can chat, generate content, take actions, all informed by an understanding of your systems, your data, and your operations. And once again, the security is super important here. So this is respecting your existing identities, roles, and permissions. If a user doesn't have permission to access something without using Q, well, they can't access it using Q either. So we've designed Q to meet the customer's stringent requirements from day one. So for your AWS applications. Q can help you learn, explore, and take actions on your applications by using the Amazon Q chat assistant. You can ask questions about different services or features. You can use it to troubleshoot. You can select the specific EC2 instance types that you want. You can start troubleshooting different types of issues that you might have with connectivity, and so on and so on. It's a chat assistant. And it can also help you with very specific troubleshooting. So say that you're trying to do something and it didn't work. Well, we've now started in the AWS console to give you this option, troubleshoot with Amazon Q, where it will then look at the issue you're facing and give you examples of how you can solve it. Let me show you a very specific example of it. So this is an AWS Lambda function that is to use Bedrock to create a summary. So let's try it. It failed. It gives me an error message that doesn't really say much to me. By clicking the Troubleshoot with Q button, it will then analyze the error, and it will give me a suggestion back, once again in natural language. So it says that the Lambda function doesn't have permission to invoke the Amazon Titan text summarization model, and the IAM role doesn't have the permission to do invoke model action. So now we can generate a resolution for it. And it is now using generative AI to give us a proposed solution to the problem. And here we go. These are the steps that Amazon Q thinks we should do. We can easily go to the IAM console, search for a specific role. We can add an inline policy in it to allow that role to be able to invoke the model. And we can then create that new policy. So it gives us the opportunity to make that changes. And then in our Python file, we can see that we have the summary Lambda function. And we can then make use of Code Whisperer to add the permission needed. Add the permission to the Lambda function. It then suggests to do this. We skip through line by line and use those suggestions. And it gives us a suggestion that we can then use. We can save. And we have now updated our application with the help of Amazon Q. We did troubleshooting, we got a suggestion back, and we implemented that in our application. We looked at Code Whisperer previously, how we're using that in the IDE. Well, you can also use Amazon Q in the IDE. So when you have the AWS Toolkit installed, you also get access to Q chat within the IDE. And that's where you can ask questions about the specific code that you have within your IDE. You can make changes to it. You can fix the code. It can help you write tests. It can help you create new features. You can make upgrades to it and so on. So let's look at an example of that. So we're opening Q, the chat, and provide me with a description of what this application does. I have an application open. So it gives me an answer back that it is a Flask application, and we wanted to write some unit tests for it. So it gives me suggestions. These are the unit tests that you can create, and we can then make use of those for our application. So it understands the code we have, and we can then ask it to do certain things with it. So not only understand the code, but also gives us, in this case, some new unit tests that we can implement in our code. Q can also help you with feature development, so you can ship new features within a fraction of the time. And once again, you can use natural language prompt to feature implementation, so you can focus on end-to-end features. And let's look at it. So now I'm going to use the /dev. I wanted to create a new application with an API. It will then show me steps that are needed. I can press the write code. It will then suggest create these files. I implement it, it updates those, and creates those files for me. So by just writing a natural language prompt, I can get Q to create a new feature by creating new files for me, and it will then implement those, and I can go ahead and try that out afterwards. So using that feature allows me to create that feature within Amazon Q allows me to create new features within my application with just natural language and a few. And then we have the feature that's called code transformation. This is where you can make changes, transformations, upgrades, and updates to existing applications quicker. So you can make use of Q as a way to update an existing application. We all know, and I mentioned it before as well, that to keep things up to date, well, there's a lot of work. You have to update packages, you have to update versions, and so on. And the more applications you create, well, the more overhead you have in keeping things up to date. So we can use Q. In this case, we have a Java application, and that's version 8. Now we want to update this. So we're choosing Form Your Application. Going to update it from version 8 to version 17. It's now going to use Amazon Q and make use of the foundation models in generative AI to see what is needed to update this application for me. So it is building code, it's generating a transformation plan for us. It shows us what is needed, update dependencies, build in Java 17, and finalize code changes and generate a transformation summary. So when it's done with this plan, it will then start transforming the code for us when we've accepted it using that transformation plan. So instead of you spending time on going through, finding what is needed, we can make use of generative AI as a way to upgrade and update our code. Here we go. Now we have a patch for our application where we can compare them and see what the difference is. And we can then apply that patch to our application. So using this is a great way to save time on these types of undifferentiated heavy lifting that we as developers often spend time on. So we briefly just looked at the generative AI stack, the 3 macro layers, and the infrastructure one that we didn't cover in this case, where you have your infrastructure used for training and inference. Then we looked at Amazon Bedrock as a way to start using generative AI in your applications and how you can leverage generative AI within your applications quickly and easily. Not only using the foundation models, but also by fine-tuning it and using RAG and also agents to use your own data for these applications as a way to make it specific for your use case and your business. And then we looked at Amazon Q and Amazon Code Whisperer as ways for you as a developer to start using generative AI as a way to become, to remove the things that are taking up time for you. So maybe in the next survey from software.com, you can say that you're spending more than 1 hour a day on actually writing code because you've freed up time from some of the other tasks you're doing. I want to show you one last thing, and that is something called Party Rock. So we all know by now that generative AI is pretty cool and it's pretty amazing what it can do. But to start using it, well, you need to come up with things that you want to do. Party Rock is meant as a way to start trying out generative AI. It is a website or an application, a service that is free for use, where you can start using and building your own applications that are using generative AI. Let me show you an example of it. So you go to Party Rock and you select that you want to build a new app. And by using natural language, you start creating your app. In this case, we want to create an app that is generating virtual meeting backgrounds. So now we've given it a name. We can now start adding widgets. We want to add a user input. And this widget should be called meeting info. And let's add a default value, and then we will save it. Annual team holiday party. And a placeholder. Right, and now we're saving that widget. So this will be user input. Next, we can add a static widget that is the instructions. Enter info about your meeting and get a virtual background image generated for it. And let's save that. Next, we are adding another widget, and this will be the generative AI powered widget. This one will be an image generator or a text generator that gives us an image description. Generate a detailed description for a virtual meeting background. So you will use the information added in the first one. Here we go. And then let's add our image widget. So this one will be the generated image based on the input. So we're using Stable Diffusion XL in this case. And it will be an image of meeting image description. And there we go. Now we've done that. So we can generate a description. Gives us a description based on what we had. And it will generate an image. And it now gives us an image based on that input that we had as well. So PartyRock allows you to easily start using both text and image generation. And this is a super simple example where you just have one input and then text and image output. But you can make these more advanced and use different types of prompts. You can have a series of prompts. You can add a chatbot and so on as well. So it's a fun way to get started using generative AI and come up with ideas for apps, perhaps. And you can then share these apps with friends, colleagues, and so on. So that's PartyRock for you. And with that, I have reached the end of my presentation. We've looked at generative AI, a bit how it works, how we're using it at AWS, and how you as a developer can start using generative AI to both build applications that make use of it, but also perhaps be more effective in the way you are doing your day-to-day job as a developer. So thank you all very much. I'm Gunnar Grosch, developer advocate at AWS, and feel free to connect on social media, LinkedIn, and so on. Thank you all.
Our webinar has come to an end. I'd like to extend a big thank you to everyone for participating, and a special thank you to the speaker for a captivating topic. It was a pleasure having you all here today. Have a great rest of your day.